here to talk to you about the misconception about Africa. There's a great poison running in the hearts of most Americans. Every race is guilty of spreading this poison either ignorantly or purposely. The main reason why a majority of us want to watch the news is to be informed about what is happening around us. But sometimes we get misled by those information we get. As we all know that the news is not always right about everything. Sometimes the news is just a rumor or a way to bring an issue to awareness of the public, not necessarily telling the truth about it. So when we see a commercial on the television encouraging us to donate money and help the needy, it takes us to one of the most remote villages in places in Africa to drive the point home. But we see this and we believe that this is all there is to Africa. There is so much more than what we see on the TV and on the news. And I hope my points will help you understand better and keep you educated about the continent of Africa. My first point would be the most popular misconception about Africa is that most people living in the United States of America are under the impression that Africa is a country. And everyone that has an accent with black skin is wrongly believed to be African. The fact remains that Africa is a continent and it has 54 countries in it. It is also considered to be the second largest continent in the world, only second to Asia. Every country in it has its own unique currency, they have their own unique flag, history, anthem, and a blend of different cultures. In fact, the language varieties in the continent of Africa is the largest when compared to any other continent in the world. Another myth I would like to talk about is that it is believed to be true about Africa is that everyone thinks that animals, especially the wild ones, freely roam the streets of Africa. Using myself as an example, even though Africa is my continent and I was born in Nigeria, the reason I brought this up is because when I joined the Navy 7 years ago, I was in boot camp and I had a 17-year-old as my bunkmate. When he found out that I was from Africa, he couldn't resist asking me one of the questions I later on found out to be quite offensive. He said, and I quote, "Do you have a lion as a pet?" My answer was no, I don't. And the only place I've ever seen a lion was in the zoo. I can tell that he was innocently asking these questions because he told me that that's what he was taught from school. This is a notion that many Americans carry in their minds. But the truth is that every other country or continent has wild animals too. Does that mean that everyone in the states like California has pet bears in his or her house? Of course not. It is just a misconception. And finally, I would like to talk about the climate conditions in Africa. Again, from my personal experience, I currently work at Naval Base in Lemoore, where the weather condition is usually hot and dry during the summer period. The first time I complained about how hot the weather was, the feedback I got from my colleagues was rather horrific. One of my coworkers hurriedly replied and said, "Isn't it hot in Africa? So why are you complaining about how hot it is?" I had to correct him immediately and educate him about how climate conditions work. Although it is true that there are many places in Africa that have hot weather conditions, but it is also true that places have extremely cold weathers too, even to a point that it actually snows in some places in Africa. In fact, it snowed particularly in South Africa and Lesotho, and there's a skiing resort in South Africa called the Tiffindale Ski Resort. This is an evidence to show folks that it is not always hot in Africa. I would like to conclude by saying that all these points in my personal experiences that I have encountered with either my co-workers or even outside of work shows that this is really happening and none of it is fabricated. I'm quite sure that some of us have either heard this firsthand or may be guilty of one or all these points I talked about in my speech. It is now left to us all to spread the news and educate others about what Africa really is, and also not be a part of the folks that are ignorantly spreading false news about Africa. I hope I have been able to open everyone's eyes to see the true image of Africa, and I hope we can all be contributors to the changes that I'm trying to make. Thank you.
That concludes the speech.